She marries the millionaire, feigning love at the altar. But the plan was to take everything and vanish without a trace. Only he discovers everything on the most important day and decides to turn the pain into the ultimate reckoning. Tell us in the comments what this scene awakened in you. Every word you share brings life to this special channel. Subscribe now. The outcome no one can imagine. London had a way of swallowing people whole. Amidst millions, you could feel utterly alone. And that was precisely how Mary Ann Smith felt that Monday morning as she walked through the glass gates of the most imposing corporate building on Oxford Street. 27 years old, a recent graduate in advertising with a specialization in creative strategies, she carried a discreet black folder in her hands and in her chest an ambition that pulsed with vigor. This wasn't just another job. It was the chance she had waited for her entire life. The Caldwell Group was one of the largest corporations in the country. It began in the 70s as a small automotive parts distributor, and over 5 decades grew into a conglomerate encompassing everything from logistics to technology, including real estate and strategic investments. The name Caldwell was synonymous with power, tradition, and for many, also fear. The founder, Octavius Ashton Caldwell, had passed away 6 months prior, leaving a void the media called irreparable. He was known for his ironclad demeanor, for quick and often ruthless decisions. They said he built the empire not just with business acumen, but with a firm hand and zero tolerance for weakness. Mary Ann knew this story. Everyone did. But what attracted her to the position wasn't the legacy of old Octavius. It was the opportunity to work directly with the new president, Philip Ashton Caldwell, the magnate's only son. Philip took over the company after his father's passing, and since then, rumors ran wild. Some said he was unprepared, others that he was unstable. There were those who commented that he never wanted to be there, that his father forced him into the company years ago, but that Philip always preferred to live away from the spotlight, dedicated to smaller, almost invisible projects within the corporation itself. Now, he was at the top, and the top, for him, seemed a very lonely place. Mary Ann was greeted on the 18th floor by Claire, a middle-aged executive assistant, efficient and cordial. She led the new employee through wide corridors with dark wood-paneled walls and abstract paintings that said nothing but cost fortunes. Everything there breathed money. Not new, ostentatious money, but that kind of old consolidated wealth that didn't need to prove itself. "Good morning, Mary Ann. Welcome. Mr. Philip is in a meeting, but he asked you to settle in and meet the team. Your desk is over there next to the strategy room. Any questions, just call me." "Thank you, Claire. I'm eager to start." Mary Ann smiled, but inside her heart pounded. She knew this was the moment to show what she was capable of. It wasn't enough to be good. She needed to be indispensable. The first few weeks were intense. Mary Ann quickly realized that the marketing team was disorganized, lost among contradictory proposals and internal squabbles for space. There were talents there, but leadership was lacking. She observed everything in silence, noting every detail, every flaw, every opportunity. And when it was time to present her first campaign, she didn't just deliver something creative. She delivered something that spoke directly to the company's identity, reviving the founders' values but with a modern, accessible language. It was an immediate success. Philip Ashton Caldwell watched the presentation from afar, seated in a chair at the back of the meeting room. He said nothing during the exposition. He merely observed. At the end, when everyone applauded, he stood up and left without comment. Mary Ann was intrigued. She had expected a compliment, perhaps a question, but she received only silence. In the corridors, the comments about Philip were always the same. He was difficult, reserved, uncommunicative. Some said he never smiled, others that he spent hours locked in his office, reviewing reports no one understood. Mary Ann, however, was not intimidated. She knew that powerful men often were like that, and she also knew that, behind all the coldness, there was always a half-open door. All she had to do was find the key. Their first real conversation happened 3 weeks later, during a corporate trip to Washington, D.C. The company was negotiating a £1 million contract with the federal government, and Philip needed a small, discreet and competent team to accompany him. Marianne was chosen to join the group. She heard the news the day before and could barely sleep. This was the chance she had been waiting for. The flight was smooth. Philip traveled in silence, reviewing documents on his tablet, while the other team members dozed or talked quietly. Marianne took the opportunity to review the communication strategies she had prepared in case she was asked for her opinion. She wanted to be ready for any eventuality. Upon arriving in Washington, D.C., they went straight to the hotel. The meeting would be the next day, early in the morning. That night, the team had dinner together at a nearby restaurant, but Philip didn't show up. They said he preferred to stay in his room working. Marianne wasn't surprised. She was already beginning to understand the pattern. The next day, the meeting was tense. The government representatives were difficult, made unexpected demands, and constantly tested Philip's patience. He, in turn, maintained a firm demeanor, but Marianne noticed something others didn't. His hands trembled slightly whenever someone asked a more aggressive question. He hid it well, but not well enough for someone who was paying attention. When they finally returned to the hotel, it was late afternoon. The team dispersed, each to their room. Marianne was in the elevator about to go up when Philip entered at the last minute carrying a heavy folder. They were alone. The silence was uncomfortable. Marianne decided to take a chance. "Mr. Philip, if I may say so, you handled the meeting very well." He raised his eyes as if he had forgotten she was there. "You think so?" "I do. I know it wasn't easy. They were testing you the whole time, but you didn't give in." Philip remained silent for a few seconds, as if processing the words. Then, for the first time since Marianne had known him, he managed something that almost resembled a smile. "Thank you, Marianne. Sometimes it's hard to know if I'm on the right track." The elevator stopped. It was her floor. Marianne stepped out, but before the doors closed, she turned back. "You are?" "Yes. I'm sure of it." The doors closed. Philip was left alone in the elevator, staring into the void, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something akin to relief. That small exchange marked the beginning of a different relationship. In the following days, Philip began to notice Marianne more frequently. Not obviously, but he called her into meetings, asked for opinions, questioned strategies. She always responded with precision, confidence, and above all, respect. She never challenged him publicly, but she also didn't keep silent when she had something important to say. She knew exactly how to temper her words. Back in London, the dynamic between them continued to develop. Philip began to trust her with more complex tasks, and Marianne, little by little, started to occupy an increasingly larger space within the company. But she knew that professional trust was only the first step. What she really needed was to enter his personal life, and for that, she would have to wait for the right moment. That moment arrived on a Thursday evening during a corporate event at the Tate Modern. It was a charity dinner, attended by business leaders, politicians, and journalists. Philip was obliged to attend, but it was visible how much he detested that kind of occasion. He moved from group to group, shaking hands, forcing polite smiles, but clearly uncomfortable. Marianne, on the other hand, was in her element. She circulated naturally, chatted with strangers, laughed at investors' unfunny jokes. But all the while she kept Philip in the corner of her eye, and it was when she saw him retreat to the outdoor balcony, alone, that she decided to act. She picked up 2 glasses of wine and went over. Philip was leaning against the railing, looking out at the illuminated city. Marianne approached slowly. "I thought you might need some company." Philip turned, surprised, but didn't seem bothered. "Thank you, but I think I'm terrible company today." "Everyone has days like that." She extended a glass. He accepted it. They stood there, side by side, in silence. Anne knew this was the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Sometimes just being present was enough. After a few minutes, Philip spoke, almost as if thinking aloud. "My father loved these events. He knew exactly what to say, how to impress people. I never had that gift. You don't have to be like him." Everyone expects me to be. Mary Ann turned to face him. And what do you expect of yourself? Philip fell silent. The question caught him off guard. No one had ever asked him that. I don't know, I guess I just wanted not to be alone in all this. His voice was laden with a vulnerability Mary Ann hadn't expected, and it was at that moment that she knew. He was ready. Ready to be molded. Ready to trust. Ready to become attached. You're not alone, Philip. There are many people who believe in you. I believe in you. He looked into her eyes. For the first time, Mary Ann saw something beyond coldness. She saw gratitude, she saw need, and she saw opportunity. Thank you, Mary Ann. Truly. She smiled, placing her hand on his arm, a light, almost casual gesture. Whenever you need me, I'll be here. They returned to the ballroom together. That night, nothing officially changed, but Mary Ann knew she had planted the first seed, and she was very patient. In the following weeks, Philip began to seek her company more often. Informal conversations in the elevator, quick coffees between meetings, text messages outside of business hours, asking for opinions on presentations. Mary Ann always responded, always available, always knew exactly what to say, but she also knew she couldn't rush things. Philip was wary, perhaps by instinct, perhaps due to past experiences. She needed to build. His trust brick by brick, without haste, without flaws. It was during a business trip to Miami 3 months later that their relationship changed level. The company was finalizing the acquisition of a technology startup, and Philip needed to spend 3 days in the city to finalize the details. Mary Ann was included in the team. On the first night, after an exhausting day of meetings, the group decided to have dinner at a seaside restaurant. Conversation flowed. Everyone was relaxed except Philip. He ate in silence, responded when asked, but clearly his mind was elsewhere. Mary Ann noticed. And when dinner ended and everyone began to get up to leave, she stayed a little longer. Philip, can I ask you a question? He looked up, surprised by the use of his first name, but he didn't correct her. Of course. Why do you always seem so distant, even when things are going well? He was silent for a long moment, as if deciding whether to answer. Then he sighed. Because I never wanted to be here, Mary Ann. I never wanted to lead this company. My father pushed me into it since I was a child. I tried to follow other paths, but he always brought me back, and now that he's gone, I'm stuck in a role that was never mine. His voice was low, almost a whisper. Mary Ann leaned forward, attentive. And what did you want to be? I don't know. Maybe just someone ordinary. Someone who could make mistakes without thousands of people paying for them. Someone who could live without the weight of a surname. Mary Ann held his hand across the table. It was an unexpected gesture, but he didn't pull back. You don't have to carry that alone, Philip. I know everyone expects you to be perfect, but you're human, and it's okay to be human. He looked at her hand on his, and for the first time since taking over as president, he felt that someone truly understood him. Thank you, Mary Ann. I don't know what I'd do without you. She smiled, and at that moment she knew she was closer than ever. In the following months, their closeness intensified. Philip began to invite Mary Ann to private meetings for strategic discussions that were previously restricted to senior executives. She came to know the inner workings of the company, the internal conflicts, the pressures from shareholders, Philip's fears, and with each revelation she positioned herself as an ally, a confidant, the only person who truly cared. But Mary Ann knew something was still missing. Philip trusted her professionally, but emotionally he still maintained a distance. She needed something more. She needed him to feel dependent on her, and for that, she would have to find his moment of greatest vulnerability. That moment came on a Friday afternoon, when Philip received news that one of the company's main shareholders was maneuvering to remove him from the presidency. The accusation was administrative, incompetence and emotional instability. There was no concrete evidence, but the rumor spread quickly, and the media began to speculate. Philip was devastated. Mary Ann was with him in the office when the news arrived. She saw his face change color, saw his hands tremble, saw his eyes fill with a mix of anger and despair. And when he finally collapsed, sitting in the chair with his head in his hands, Mary Ann didn't hesitate. She approached, knelt beside him, and held his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to what I'm going to tell. You, Philip, you are not weak. You are not incompetent. You are human. And what they are doing to you is cowardice. But you will overcome this, and I will be by your side the whole time." Her words were firm, but her touch was gentle. Philip looked into her eyes and for the first time let his tears fall. Mary Ann embraced him, and he, without the strength to resist, allowed himself to be hugged. It was that day that everything changed. Philip no longer saw Mary Ann merely as a talented employee. She was the person who saved him when he was sinking. She was the only one who believed in him when everyone doubted. She was in his mind the right woman, and Mary Ann knew it. She knew exactly what she had achieved. Now it was only a matter of time. The 6 months that followed were a silent yet profound transformation. Philip Ashton Caldwell, the man who always avoided the spotlight, who shied away from social engagements, and who carried the weight of his surname like a sentence, began to change. Not abruptly, but gradually, like someone who finally finds a reason to wake up. In the morning. And that reason had a name, Mary Ann. She was always present, not invasively, but constantly. When Philip needed an opinion on a difficult decision, she was the one available. When shareholders pressed for results, it was Mary Ann who devised communication strategies that calmed tempers. When loneliness pressed in, and Philip found himself alone in his empty penthouse apartment in Canary Wharf, it was she who sent a simple yet comforting message. "Is everything okay?" And Philip believed. He believed that Mary Ann truly cared, that her attention had no ulterior motives. That, finally, someone saw. Him beyond his surname, beyond his fortune, beyond the company. He fell in love. Not suddenly, but gradually, like someone who discovers they were thirsty and finally finds water. Mary Ann, in turn, conducted everything with the precision of a surgeon. Every gesture, every word, every glance was calculated. She knew when to approach and when to retreat. She knew when to show vulnerability and when to remain strong. She knew, above all, that Philip wasn't looking for a perfect woman. He was looking for someone who would make him feel less alone, and she molded herself precisely into that form. It was on a rainy October afternoon, while they were working together in the meeting room reviewing the company's quarterly results, that Philip finally took the step Mary Ann was waiting for. He stopped mid-sentence, looked at her, and asked, almost without thinking, "Mary Ann, would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Not for work, just to talk." She raised her eyes, feigning surprise. "Dinner?" "Yes. If you'd like, of course. It doesn't have to be anything formal. I just thought it would be nice, I don't know, to get out of here for a bit." "Mary," Anne smiled, a soft, almost shy smile. "I'd love to, Philip." That night they dined at a discreet restaurant in Kensington. It wasn't overly expensive or flashy. Philip chose it precisely for that reason. He didn't want to seem ostentatious. He just wanted to be with her. Conversation flowed naturally. They talked about movies, books, trips they'd like to take. Philip told stories from his childhood, of times he tried to rebel against his father, and always failed. Mary Ann listened to everything with genuine attention, or at least that's what it seemed like, and when he asked about her life, Mary Ann told just enough. A simple childhood in the rural Midlands, hard-working parents, the struggle to pay for university. All true, but she omitted the rest. The fierce ambition, the determination to never again be invisible. The conviction that she deserved more than life had offered her until then. At the end of the night, when Philip dropped her off at her apartment, a small rented studio in Shoreditch, he hesitated before saying goodbye. Mary Ann noticed his hesitation and decided to make it easier. She leaned in and gave him a soft kiss on his cheek, close to his mouth but not quite on it. "Thank you for the evening, Philip. It was special." He smiled, and for the first time in a long while, he seemed truly happy. In the following days, their meetings multiplied. Dinners turned into breakfasts. Text conversations turned into calls that lasted for hours. Philip began to introduce Mary Ann to the few employees he trusted, always discreetly, but it was clear she held a special place. And Marianne, with the skill of someone who knows how to read environments, won the sympathy of some and the distrust of others. Among the distrustful was Eleanor Davies, a financial analyst who had worked at the company for 8 years. Eleanor was discreet, almost invisible. She didn't participate in gossip, didn't get involved in internal politics. She did her job competently, received sporadic praise and went home without making a fuss. But Eleanor had a characteristic few noticed. She observed everything, and ever since Marianne arrived, Eleanor had been observing. There was something that didn't fit. The way Marianne was always in the right place at the right time, the way she knew exactly what to say to each person, the way she gained Philip's trust with a speed that seemed almost impossible. Eleanor had no proof of anything, but her instinct told her something was wrong. Still, she remained silent. She wasn't the type of person to accuse without certainty, and above all, she knew no one would believe her. After all, Marianne was adored, and Eleanor was just another employee. Meanwhile, the relationship between Philip and Marianne evolved. He took her to see the family's country home in the Lake District, a retreat few had the privilege of visiting. It was a silent place surrounded by ancient pines where Philip spent weekends when he needed to escape the pressures of London. There, away from the company's gaze, they could just be themselves. Or at least, Philip believed that. Marianne, on the other hand, used that weekend to deepen their connection even further. She asked questions about his past, about childhood traumas, about his difficult relationship with his father. Philip opened up like never before. He spoke of the constant demands, the feeling of never being good enough, the day his father told him he was too weak to lead the company. Marianne listened too. Everything held his hand and said exactly what he needed to hear. "You are not weak, Philip, you are human, and that's precisely why you will be a better leader than your father ever was." That night, they slept together for the first time. It wasn't planned, but natural. And for Philip, it was confirmation that he had found the right person. For Marianne, it was confirmation that she was on the right track. The following months brought apparent stability. The company began to show better results, partly thanks to the strategies implemented by Marianne's team. Shareholders still looked at Philip with distrust, but no longer openly spoke of replacing him. And he, for the first time since taking over the presidency, seemed comfortable in the role. Not because he had learned to love power, but because he no longer felt alone. Marianne became an essential part of his routine. They woke up together, had breakfast discussing the day's commitments, worked side by side, and in the evening returned to his apartment, where they dined and talked late into the night. To outsiders, they were a perfect couple, and Philip truly believed that. But while Philip was living this moment of happiness, Marianne began to take the next steps of her plan. She started meeting discreetly with some of the company's investors, always under the pretext of better understanding the business operations. In these meetings, she planted subtle doubts about Philip's leadership ability. Nothing explicit, just careful comments. "He's brilliant, but sometimes I worry. I think the pressure is getting to him too much." Or, "I've been trying to help him, but there are days when he seems absent. I hope everything is okay." The investors listened, and some began to agree. After all, Marianne was the closest person to Philip. If anyone knew his weaknesses, it was her. At the same time, Marianne began to document everything. She recorded conversations where Philip showed insecurity. She saved messages where he confessed not knowing if he was making the right decisions. She took screenshots of his medical reports, which she had managed to access through the executive assistant Claire, whom she won over with gifts and compliments. All of this was carefully archived, waiting for the right moment to be used. But Marianne knew one fundamental piece was still missing: marriage. As long as, she was just the girlfriend, she would have no legal rights to Philip's fortune. She needed to become his wife, and for that, she needed him to propose. It didn't take long. One April evening, during a romantic dinner at his apartment, Philip knelt before her with a diamond ring that had belonged to his mother. Philip's mother had passed away when he was a teenager, and that ring was one of the few mementos he kept of her. Giving it to Marianne was, for him, the most important gesture he could make. "Marianne, ever since you came..." Into my life, everything has changed. You made me believe that I can be more than my surname, that I can be loved for who I am, not for what I possess. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Will you marry me?" Mary Ann felt her heart race, not from emotion but from triumph. This was the moment she had planned since day one, but her expression was one of pure emotion. Tears streamed down her face, and she held his hands tightly. "Yes, Philip, 1,000 times yes." He hugged her, happier than he had ever been, and she inwardly smiled. Victory. Wedding preparations began immediately. Philip insisted on a discreet but elegant ceremony. He didn't want to turn the most important day of his life into a corporate event. Mary Ann publicly agreed, but inwardly she knew it would be impossible to avoid. After all, the president of one of the country's largest companies couldn't get married without the presence of key shareholders, investors, and important figures from the corporate world. And that was precisely what she subtly suggested until Philip agreed. The chosen venue was a historic mansion in Belgravia, with extensive gardens and an internal chapel. The date was set for a Saturday in June. Invitations were sent, and the guest list included everyone from ministers to influential business leaders. Philip was not comfortable with the scale the event had taken on, but Mary Ann convinced him it was necessary. After all, this wedding would also be an opportunity to strengthen his image as a stable and successful leader. As preparations progressed, Philip made a decision that surprised everyone. He decided not to have a prenuptial agreement. His lawyers were horrified. They argued it was imprudent, that he was exposing himself to unnecessary risks, but Philip was unyielding. "I trust her, and I won't start a marriage by inserting clauses of distrust. That's not negotiable." Mary Ann, upon learning of the decision, feigned emotion. She told Philip he was the most honorable man she had ever known, and that it only made her love him even more. But inwardly, she knew she had just won the biggest gamble of her life. The days leading up to the wedding were intense. There were meetings with decorators, dress fittings, final adjustments. Mary Ann seemed the perfect bride, involved in every detail, always smiling, always charming. Philip watched her, enamored, fully believing he had found the woman of his life. But while everything seemed to be heading for a happy ending, something was happening behind the scenes. Eleanor Davies, the discreet financial analyst who never got involved in trouble, finally decided to act. After months of observing, she had started investigating on her own, and what she discovered left her speechless. Eleanor found records of secret meetings between Mary Ann and some investors. She discovered messages exchanged on encrypted apps, where Mary Ann openly discussed strategies to take control of the company after the wedding. There was even a detailed plan to use manipulated psychiatric reports to question Philip's mental sanity, remove him from the presidency for alleged incapacity, and, with the support of allied investors, assume controlling interest. Eleanor was in shock. She knew Mary Ann was ambitious, but she never imagined anything of this magnitude, and now she faced a dilemma. What to do with that information? She thought about approaching Philip directly, but knew he would never believe her. After all, he was completely blinded by passion. She thought about taking it to the authorities, but no formal crime was being committed yet. Everything was just planning. And then, one sleepless night, Eleanor made a decision. She would gather all the evidence and deliver it to someone who could act at the right moment. That someone was Bernard Taylor, one of the company's oldest partners, who had always maintained a respectful but distant relationship with Philip. Bernard was a 70-year-old man, pragmatic, who had worked alongside Octavius Ashton Caldwell since the beginning. He wasn't sentimental, but he had a sense of loyalty to the family, and when Eleanor approached him, bringing with her all the evidence she had collected, Bernard remained silent for long minutes. "Are you sure about this?" "Absolutely." Bernard sighed deeply. "Philip won't believe it. He's in love." "I know. That's why I didn't go to him. But someone has to do something." Bernard looked at the documents scattered across the table. Messages, screenshots, recordings. It was all there. And he knew Eleanor was right. "Leave it to me. I know what to do." The wedding was scheduled for a week later, and Bernard knew he had to act fast. But he also knew he couldn't simply show Philip the evidence before the ceremony. He wouldn't believe it. He needed something more impactful, something that couldn't be denied, and that's when Bernard had an idea, a risky idea, but one that, if it worked, would save Philip from a tragedy. He would wait until the wedding day, and at the right moment he would reveal everything, in front of everyone. Meanwhile, Mary Ann lived her last days as an innocent bride. She tried on her dress one last time, a classic French lace model that made her look like a princess. She spent hours choosing every detail of the decoration, making sure everything would be perfect. And every night she slept beside Philip, whispering words of love that he believed to be true. On the eve of the wedding, the two dined alone in the apartment. Philip was nervous, but happy. Mary Ann, on the other hand, was serene. Everything had gone exactly as planned. The next day she would officially become the wife of the richest man in the country, and from then on it would only be a matter of time until the empire was hers. "Tomorrow my life changes forever," Philip said, holding her hand across the table. "Our life," Mary Ann corrected, smiling. "That's right, ours." He kissed her and she reciprocated, hiding the victorious smile that wanted to escape her lips. But while Mary Ann slept peacefully that night, believing everything was under control, an envelope was being prepared. Inside it, all the evidence, all the plans, all the secrets. And the next day, before hundreds of guests, everything would come to light. The wedding day dawned with an impeccable blue sky over London. It was one of those rare Saturdays when the city seemed to breathe, as if even the pollution had decided to grant a truce. The mansion in Belgravia was immaculate. White and light pink flowers decorated every corner, from the garden to the internal chapel. Delicate arrangements of orchids and lilies perfumed the air. Everything was exactly as Mary Ann had planned. She woke early in the mansion's guest room where she had spent the previous night. Tradition. Philip had insisted they not see each other before the ceremony, and Mary Ann gladly accepted. After all, a little romance never hurt, and besides, she needed time to prepare. This would be the most important day of her life, the day everything would change. While the makeup artist worked on her face, Mary Ann looked at her reflection in the mirror. She saw a beautiful, flawless woman, in control. There was no nervousness, no doubt, only certainty. She had reached where she wanted to be, and from then on, it would merely be a matter of executing the plan with patience. On the other side of the mansion, Philip was also getting ready. He was visibly nervous. His hands trembled as he adjusted his tie for the third time. Bernard Taylor was with him, helping with the final details. The old partner observed Philip with an expression difficult to decipher. There was concern there, but also determination. "Is everything all right, Bernard?" Philip asked, noticing his friend's silence. "Yes, lad. I was just thinking about your father. He'd be proud to see you here today." Philip smiled, but there was sadness in the smile. "I don't know if he'd be proud. I think he'd say I'm making a mistake by not having a prenuptial agreement." "Perhaps, but what matters is what you think." "I think I'm doing the right thing. Mary Ann is different, Bernard. She truly loves me." Bernard nodded slowly but said nothing. Inside his jacket, he felt the weight of the envelope. He had thought 1,000 times whether or not to go through with it. It was an enormous risk. If he was wrong, he would destroy Philip's relationship with the only person who seemed to make him happy. But if he was right, and Bernard knew he was, he would save the young man from a tragedy. Guests began to arrive around 4 in the afternoon. Imported cars pulled up in front of the mansion, and men in suits and women in expensive dresses alighted, smiling politely. There were business leaders, politicians, discreet journalists, and even some representatives from international organizations with whom the company maintained partnerships. It was the kind of event that couldn't go unnoticed. Eleanor Davies arrived alone, wearing a discreet navy blue dress. She didn't have a personal invitation, but as a trusted employee she was included on the list. She walked through the garden, greeting some colleagues, but her gaze was sharp. She knew what Bernard planned to do, and she was nervous. It could all go very wrong, but she also knew there was no other choice. At 5 in the afternoon, guests were invited. into the chapel. It was an elegant space with stained glass windows and polished wooden pews. At the altar, a grey-haired priest waited, smiling. The music began to play. A string quartet performed a soft version of a classical composition. Philip entered, accompanied by Bernard, and took his place at the altar. He was pale, but his eyes shone with emotion. And then the chapel doors opened. Mary Ann entered, walking slowly down the central aisle. The white French lace dress fell perfectly over her body, and the delicate veil covered part of her face. She held a bouquet of white roses and walked with the poise of someone who knows all eyes are on her, and they were. Guests turned to admire her, whispering compliments. She was the perfect bride. Philip looked at her as if seeing a miracle, his eyes filled with tears. When Mary Ann reached the altar and stood beside him, he whispered softly, "You look beautiful." She smiled from behind her veil. "And you look handsome too." The priest began the ceremony. He spoke of love, commitment, union. The words sounded beautiful, almost poetic. Philip listened to each of them attentively, moved. Mary Ann, on the other hand, barely paid attention. She already knew what was coming. She had already memorized every part. Her mind was elsewhere, calculating her next moves. But as the priest spoke, Bernard Taylor, seated in the front row, discreetly glanced at his watch. He knew he needed to act before the exchange of rings, before the vows were made, because after that it would be too late. The priest reached the part about the vows. "Philip Ashton Caldwell, do you take Mary Ann Smith as your lawful wife, to love and to cherish, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Philip took a deep breath, emotional. "Yes, I do." "Mary Ann Smith, do you take Philip Ashton Caldwell as your lawful husband, to love and to cherish, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Mary Ann opened her mouth to answer, but before she could say anything, a grave voice echoed through the chapel. "Excuse me, Father, but I must interrupt." Everyone turned. Bernard Taylor was standing, holding an envelope in his hands. The silence that fell was deafening. Philip looked at his friend, confused. "Bernard, what are you doing?" "I'm saving you, lad." Philip frowned, not understanding. Mary Ann, on the other hand, felt her heart race. Something was wrong, very wrong. Bernard began to walk toward the altar. His footsteps echoed in the silent chapel. When he reached Philip, he extended the envelope. "Before you get married, you need to see this." Philip took the envelope, hesitant. He looked at Mary Ann, who was pale. She opened her mouth to say something, but no sound came out. Philip opened the envelope. Inside there were printed sheets, text messages, app conversations, bank statements, transcribed recordings. He began to read, and as his eyes scanned the words, his expression changed. Confusion, disbelief, pain. The messages were clear. Mary Ann discussing with investors how to remove Philip from the company. Mary Ann talking about using psychiatric reports to declare him incapacitated. Mary Ann planning to take control of the company. There was even a timeline. 6 months after the wedding, initiate the removal process. 1 year later, officially assume the presidency. Philip read everything, every word, every plan, every betrayal. And when he finished, his hands trembled so much that the sheets almost fell to the floor. He raised his eyes to Mary Ann, and for the first time she saw something she had never seen before in that gaze. Hatred. "What is this, Mary Ann?" His voice was low, but laden with contained fury. Mary Ann tried to maintain her composure. She tried to smile, tried to deny, but the words wouldn't come out. She looked around, hundreds of eyes on her, waiting, judging. "Philip, I can explain." "Explain? Can you explain how you planned to destroy me? How you manipulated everything from the start? How you pretended to love me just to steal? Everything my father built?" His voice was rising. Guests began to whisper. Some pulled out their phones, discreetly recording. Mary Ann felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "Philip, please, not here. We can talk privately." "No, here, in front of everyone, because it was here, in front of everyone, that you were going to deceive me." He turned to the guests, holding the papers aloft. "All of you came here today thinking you would witness a wedding, But what you almost witnessed was the biggest scam of my life. This woman, whom I loved, whom I trusted, whom I thought was different from all others, used me from day one. Everything was planned, every word, every gesture, every moment, and I, like an idiot, believed her. Mary Ann tried to approach, but he recoiled. "Don't come near me." "Philip, I love you." "Shut up!" The scream echoed through the chapel. Some guests flinched. Mary Ann began to cry, not from sadness, but from despair. Everything was falling apart. Philip turned to Bernard. "Project this." Bernard nodded. He was already prepared. Within minutes, a screen was set up on the side wall of the chapel. And then, to everyone's shock, the messages began to be projected. One by one, conversations where Mary Ann called Philip naive, messages where she laughed at his feelings, screenshots of secret meetings with investors, transcribed recordings where she said Philip was weak, manipulable, perfect for her plans. The guests watched in silence, some in shock, others in revulsion. Mary Ann was paralyzed, watching her life be destroyed in real time. When the projection ended, Philip turned to her one last time. "I gave you everything, Mary Ann, my trust, my heart. And you? You only wanted my money, my company, my surname. But do you know what you won't get? Nothing, absolutely nothing." He took the engagement ring from his pocket, the ring that had belonged to his mother, and threw it on the floor at her feet. "Get out of here. Now." Mary Ann looked around. Everyone stared at her with contempt. She tried to say something, but there were no words. Slowly she bent down, picked up the ring, and without looking back, walked down the chapel aisle. Each step was an eternity. People moved away from her as if she were contagious, and when she finally exited through the chapel doors, disappearing into the garden, the whispers erupted. Philip stood still at the altar, breathing with difficulty. His body trembled. Bernard approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let's get out of here, lad." Philip nodded, unable to speak. Together, they exited through the side door of the chapel, leaving behind the shocked guests and what should have been the happiest day of his life. In the following days, the scandal exploded. The story of the interrupted wedding went viral. Journalists surrounded the company, demanding statements. Television programs discussed the case. Social media debated who was to blame, who was the victim. Some defended Philip. Others said he had cruelly exposed Mary Ann. But most simply consumed the drama with veracity. Mary Ann disappeared. No one knew where she was. Some said she returned to the Midlands. Others, that she fled abroad. But the truth was that she was hiding in a rented apartment in the East End of London, watching her reputation be shattered on every channel, every website, every conversation. Philip, on the other hand, was locked in his apartment, refusing to leave. He didn't eat. He barely slept. He just sat in the dark, reliving every moment, every word, every lie. And the pain was unbearable. Bernard tried to visit him several times, but Philip didn't answer. Eleanor also tried sending messages, but he didn't reply. It was as if he had completely shut himself off from the world. And it was in this state of despair that Philip began to question everything: his ability to judge people, his ability to lead, his own sanity. Perhaps the shareholders were right. Perhaps he really was too weak to be in charge. Perhaps everything Mary Ann said about him was true. Meanwhile, the company began to suffer the consequences of the scandal. Shares fell. Investors grew nervous. Rumors of an internal crisis spread. And the shareholders, who already distrusted Philip, now demanded his resignation. At an emergency board meeting, 3 weeks after the interrupted wedding, pressure reached its limit. Philip was present but seemed absent. He listened to the accusations, the questions, the demands, but didn't react. It was as if a part of him had died in that chapel. "Mr. Philip, with all due respect, but you are not in a condition to lead this company," said one of the shareholders, a 60-year-old man with a grave voice. "The scandal has tarnished our image. Shares are in freefall. We need someone firm at the helm, and right now you are not that person." Philip looked at the man but said nothing. Bernard Taylor tried to defend the young man. "Philip was a victim of elaborate manipulation. He is not to blame." But he has responsibility, another shareholder interrupted. Responsibility for the company. And at this moment, he is failing. The debate continued for hours, but Philip did not participate. He merely sat, staring at the table. And when the meeting finally ended, with the decision that he would have 30 days to prove he could still lead or be removed, Philip stood up and left in silence. That night he returned to his apartment and found something he didn't expect. A letter. It was on the living room table, in a yellowed envelope, with his name handwritten on it. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from his father. With trembling hands, Philip opened the envelope. Inside, there were several handwritten sheets. It was an emotional testament, something Octavius Ashton Caldwell had written shortly before his passing, but which had never come to anyone's attention. Bernard had found the document among the old man's personal files and decided it was time to deliver it to his son. Philip began to read. "My son, if you are reading this, it is because I am no longer here. And I know that, most likely, you are suffering. Because I know you, Philip. I know your kindness, your empathy, your inability to see evil in people. And I know that sooner or later, someone would try to take advantage of that. Perhaps it has already happened. Perhaps it is happening now. I was hard on you your whole life. I demanded too much. I expected too much. And I know you hate me for it, but I did everything because I knew the world is cruel, son. And I wanted to prepare you. I wanted you to be strong enough to resist. But now I realize I made a mistake. Because strength is not the absence of sensitivity. Strength is knowing how to deal with it. You are better than I ever was. More human, more just, more compassionate. And that is precisely why you will be a better leader. But for that, you need to learn one thing that took me a lifetime to understand. Not everyone deserves your trust. Not everyone deserves your heart. Surround yourself with people who see you for who you are, not for what you possess. Trust those who challenge you, and distrust those who only agree. And above all, remember, you don't have to be like me. You just need to be yourself. I love you, son, always have, even if I never managed to say it." Philip finished reading with tears streaming down his face. For the first time since the wedding, he truly cried. Not from pain, but from relief, because finally he understood. He understood that he wasn't alone, that he never had been. But even with the letter, even with his father's words, Philip knew he couldn't continue. Not there, not in that company, not in that life. He needed to leave. He needed to disappear. He needed to find himself again. And that's exactly what he did. 3 days later, without telling anyone, Philip Ashton Caldwell disappeared. No one knew where Philip had gone. The morning after his disappearance, Bernard Taylor arrived at the office and found only a short note on the desk. "I need time, don't look for me." The secretary tried to call his cell phone, but it was off. The apartment was empty, with signs that he had packed in a hurry. His car remained in the garage. It was as if he had simply evaporated. The news spread quickly. The media, already obsessed with the wedding scandal, found a new angle: the businessman's disappearance. Headlines speculated about everything. Some newspapers suggested deep depression. Others spoke of voluntary admission to a psychiatric clinic. There were even those who speculated he had left the country. Television programs dedicated hours to the topic, inviting psychologists, behavioral experts, and even former employees to comment on the whereabouts of Philip Ashton Caldwell. The company's shareholders panicked. Without the president, without clear direction, the company began to falter. Shares plummeted even further. Emergency meetings took place every day, but no one could make definitive decisions. After all, Philip was still legally the president, and without a formal declaration of resignation or incapacity, no one could simply replace him. Bernard Taylor tried to remain calm, temporarily assuming some administrative responsibilities, but he knew it couldn't last long. The company needed leadership, and Philip, wherever he was, seemed to have given up on everything. Meanwhile, in a small town in the rural Midlands, 250 kilometers from Birmingham, a man with stubble and simple clothes entered a modest guest house. He registered under a false name, paid a month in advance, and went up to his room without saying more than necessary. The guest house owner, a grey-haired woman with a kind smile, found the young man a little strange, but didn't ask questions. Many people passed through there wanting to escape something. She knew the type. Philip chose that town precisely because it was forgettable. Little Creek was one of those places that barely appeared on maps. It had a central square, a centuries-old church, a few craft shops and little else. Life there followed a slow, almost contemplative rhythm. People woke early, worked in the fields or in small shops, ate lunch at home, and in the evening sat on the pavements to chat. There was no rush, no competition, no elaborate lies. In the first few days, Philip barely left his room. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, reliving everything that had happened. Memories came in waves. Mary Ann smiling at him. Mary Ann saying she loved him. Mary Ann planning his destruction. The pain was physical. He felt a tightness in his chest that wouldn't go away. Sometimes he cried. Other times he just felt numb, feeling nothing. But gradually, the town's silence began to have an effect. It wasn't an empty silence, but one full of subtle sounds he had never noticed before. Birds singing in the morning, the wind in the trees, children playing in the street. All of this slowly penetrated his consciousness, as if he were rediscovering the world. One morning, 3 weeks after his arrival, Philip left his room and went down for breakfast on the guest house veranda. The owner, Mrs. Carmen, was serving warm cheese bread, fresh coffee and cornmeal cake. She smiled when she saw him. "Good morning, young man. I thought you weren't going to show up again." "Good morning. Sorry for disappearing." "Don't worry, everyone has their own time. Sit down, I'll serve you." Philip sat on one of the wooden chairs and for the first time in weeks felt truly hungry. He ate slowly, savoring each bite. Mrs. Carmen observed him discreetly, sensing there was something heavy about the young man, but respecting his silence. "Where are you from, young man?" "London." "Ah, a Londoner. And what brought you here to Little Creek?" Philip hesitated. Then he decided to be honest, at least partially. "I needed to disappear for a while, to leave some things behind." Mrs. Carmen nodded, as if that made all the sense in the world. "Sometimes we really do. I myself came here 30 years ago, escaping a marriage that didn't work out. I thought I'd only stay a few months, but I ended up putting down roots. This land has that power. It heals." Philip smiled for the first time in a long while, a small but genuine smile. "I hope it does heal." After breakfast, Philip began to walk through the town. He passed by the central square, where elderly people played dominoes in the shade of the trees. He passed by the church, where a morning mass was taking place. He passed by the local market, where the owner greeted each customer by name. Everything there was so different from the world he knew, so simple, so honest. In the following days, Philip established a routine. He woke early, had breakfast at the guest house, walked around town, had lunch at a small restaurant, and spent afternoons reading on the veranda or simply watching life go by. In the evening, he had a light dinner and went to bed early. He had no cell phone, no internet, no news from the outside world, and for the first time in years, he felt at peace. It was during one of these walks that he met Mr. Jonathan, a man in his 80s who spent his days sitting in front of his house watching the street activity. Philip passed by several times before having the courage to greet him. But one afternoon, Mr. Jonathan called out to him. "Hey, young man, come here for a bit." Philip approached, curious. "You're the young man staying at Mrs. Carmen's guest house, aren't you?" "I am, yes." "I thought so. Small town. Everyone knows everything. Sit here with me for a while." Philip sat on the wooden bench beside the old man. They remained silent for a few minutes, just watching the empty street. Then Mr. Jonathan spoke. "You're running from something, aren't you?" Philip looked at him, surprised. "Why do you think that?" "Because I recognize it. I did it too a long time ago. I ran from a debt I couldn't pay, from a family that didn't understand me, from a life that wasn't mine. I ended up here and never left. And was it worth it?" Mr. Jonathan smiled, showing the few teeth he still had. "It was. Because here I learned that we don't run from things. We run from ourselves. And when we finally stop running, we find what truly matters." Philip remained silent, absorbing the words. Mr. Jonathan continued, "Whatever you're carrying, young man, this land will help you. But you need to let it work. You need to stop fighting. It's against yourself." Those words echoed in Philip's mind for the following days, and little by little he began to understand. It wasn't London he was running from. It wasn't the company, nor the shareholders, nor the media. He was running from his own fragility, from the pain of having been deceived, from the shame of having been naive. But Mr. Jonathan was right. Running solved nothing. He needed to confront. And that's how, slowly, Philip began to rebuild himself, not by trying to be strong, but by accepting being human. He began to help Mrs. Carmen at the guest house, fixing small things, painting walls, tending the garden. She didn't ask, but he offered, and she gladly accepted. There was something therapeutic in that manual labor. Each painted wall, each watered plant pot, was as if he were mending something within himself. He also started talking more with the townspeople, with Mrs. Carmen, with Mr. Jonathan, with the market owner, with the local school teacher, and he discovered that each of them had a story. Each had faced pains, losses, betrayals. But all had moved on, not because they were strong, but because they had no choice. And there was a beauty in that. 2 months after his arrival, Philip was sitting on the guest house veranda when an unknown woman appeared. She was about 30, with brown hair tied in a ponytail, simple clothes, and a determined gaze. Philip recognized her immediately, even though they had never spoken beyond formal greetings. It was Eleanor Davies, the financial analyst who always kept her distance at the company. "Philip?" He tensed. He was afraid she was there to take him back. But before he could say anything, Eleanor raised her hands in a gesture of peace. "Calm down. I didn't come to get you. Nor did I come to pressure you. I just came to see you. How did you find me? It wasn't easy. It took weeks. But I needed to make sure you were okay." Philip looked at her, confused. Why did she care? They barely knew each other. Eleanor sat in a chair next to him without asking permission. "May I speak?" Philip nodded. "I know what Mary Ann did. I knew from the beginning. I saw the signs. I saw the secret meetings. I saw the plans. And I did nothing. I stayed quiet because I thought it wasn't my business. But after the wedding, after everything that happened, I realized I should have done something, and I feel guilty about it." Philip remained silent, processing. "It's not your fault. I was the idiot." "You weren't an idiot. You were human. You trusted. And there's nothing wrong with that." "Yes, there is. My father always said I was too weak to lead. And he was right. He wasn't. Your father was a great businessman, but he was also too harsh. He built an empire, but he lost his son in the process. And now you have the chance to be different, to build something that is truly yours." Philip looked at her, surprised by her frankness. "Why did you come all this way, Eleanor?" "Because I believe in you, and because I think you still have a lot to offer. But it doesn't have to be the way others expect. It can be your way." They talked for hours. Eleanor told him about the chaos at the company, about the shareholders' desperate attempts to keep everything running, about rumors that Mary Ann was planning a comeback. Philip listened to everything but showed no intention of returning. "I don't. To know if I can, Eleanor. I don't know if I still have the strength for that. You do. You just need to find out why it's worth fighting for." She stayed in town for 3 days, and during that time, something changed. It wasn't a romance. It wasn't passion. It was something more subtle, more true. It was respect. It was understanding. It was the feeling that, for the first time, someone truly saw him, not as the company president, not as the magnate's son, but as Philip, just Philip. On the day Eleanor left, she left an envelope with him. "Only open it when you're ready." "Ready for what?" "To come back." Philip put the envelope away, unopened. But Eleanor's visit had planted a seed. Perhaps he really still had something to offer. Perhaps it wasn't the end yet. In the following weeks, Philip began to reflect on what he truly wanted, and he realized he didn't want to go back to the old company. He didn't want to go back to that world of intrigues, pressures, and masks. But he also realized he couldn't simply abandon everything, not out of obligation, but because there were people who depended on that work, Honest employees who had nothing to do with the power games. It was then that Philip opened Eleanor's envelope. Inside there was a document. It was a detailed report on the company's financial situation with restructuring suggestions. But more than that, there was a proposal. Eleanor suggested that Philip found a new independent company focused on areas he truly cared about: sustainability, social impact, inclusion, and that he used the knowledge acquired during his years at his father's company to create something better, something true. Philip read the document 3 times, and for the first time since the interrupted wedding, he felt something he had forgotten: hope. He wasn't ready to return yet, but now he knew that when he did, it would be different. He wouldn't return to save the old company. He would return to build something new, something that was truly his. 6 months after his disappearance, Philip Ashton Caldwell finally returned to London. Not with fanfare, but discreetly. He arrived on a Monday morning and went straight to Bernard Taylor's office. The old partner, upon seeing him, was speechless. He hugged the young man tightly, like a father hugging a son who had finally come home. "I thought you weren't coming back." "I thought so too, but I realized I still have things to do. The company. It's no longer my priority. I will officially resign from the presidency. But first, I want to ensure the right people are in charge, and I want your help with that." Bernard nodded, emotional. "What do you need?" "I want to start from scratch. Something new. Something that makes sense." In the following days, Philip met with lawyers, consultants, and trusted investors. And slowly he began to outline the project for a new enterprise. It wouldn't be a giant conglomerate. It would be something smaller, more focused, more human. The goal would be to create opportunities for vulnerable young people, offering professional training, psychological support, and entry into the job market. It would be called the Phoenix Institute. News of Philip's return and the new project quickly reached the media. But this time the narrative was different. He was no longer the naive businessman who was deceived. He was the man who overcame betrayal, found himself, and decided to use his second chance to make a difference. Journalists requested interviews. Philip refused them all. He wasn't interested in attention. He was interested in purpose. But while Philip rebuilt his life, Mary Ann watched everything from afar. She had spent the last few months in hiding, planning her return, and now, seeing Philip celebrated as a symbol of overcoming adversity, she felt something she hadn't expected: rage. She wasn't going to let it end like that. She still had cards up her sleeve, and it was time to play them. Using the contacts she had made during her time at the company, Mary Ann founded her own corporate consulting firm. It was small, but it had potential. And more importantly, it had clients willing to invest. Clients who, like her, disliked Philip. Clients who wanted to see him fall. Mary Ann began offering her services to competing companies using privileged information she had absorbed during her time alongside Philip. She knew his old company's weaknesses. She knew which clients were vulnerable. She knew where to strike, and she attacked with surgical precision. Within a few months, Mary Ann's company began to grow. Not as much as the old Caldwell company, but enough to cause concern. And when the media discovered she was back in the game, public interest exploded again. The rivalry between Philip and Mary Ann became the subject of television programs, newspaper articles, and social media discussions. Some rooted for Philip. Others, surprisingly, began to defend Mary Ann, saying she was being unfairly judged for being an ambitious woman. Philip tried to ignore it, but it was impossible, especially when Mary Ann began giving interviews, rewriting the narrative. She presented herself as the victim. She said Philip had publicly humiliated her, that he used his power to destroy her reputation, that everything was just a misunderstanding. And the worst part, some people believed her. But the battle was far from over, because Mary Ann had one last trump card, something she had saved for the right moment, and that moment was coming. The announcement came on a Thursday morning via a social media post from Mary Ann. The photo showed a medical scan, carefully edited to reveal only what was necessary. She was pregnant, and in the caption, a message calculated to cause maximum impact. After months of silence, I need to share a truth I carry with me. I am expecting a baby, and the father is Philip Ashton Caldwell. I know many will question, many will doubt, but the truth always comes out. I seek nothing more than what is fair, for this child to know their father and have the rights that belong to them. The post went viral in minutes. Comments multiplied by the thousands. Some supported Marianne, others attacked her. Hashtags emerged. Television programs cancelled their schedules to discuss the matter, and Philip, who was in a meeting with investors for the Phoenix Institute, received dozens of simultaneous calls. When he finally managed to access the internet and saw the post, he felt the ground disappear beneath him again. Not because of the accusation itself, but because of its cruelty. Marianne knew exactly where to strike. She knew it would reopen all his wounds, and she knew that, regardless of the truth, the mere doubt would be enough to tarnish everything he had rebuilt. Bernard Taylor was the first to arrive at Philip's office, finding the young man seated, pale, staring at his phone screen. "Is this true?" Philip raised his eyes, and Bernard saw something he didn't expect. It wasn't despair, it was weariness. A profound weariness of having to constantly fight. "I don't know, Bernard. It could be. We had a relationship, but if it's true, why did she wait all this time to say anything? Why now, just when I'm finally managing to rebuild my life? Because that's precisely her goal. To destroy you." Philip sighed, running his hands over his face. "Then let's do the test. I want to know the truth." The proposal for the DNA test was made public the same day through an official statement released by Philip's lawyers. He did not deny the possibility. He did not attack Marianne, he simply asked for the truth. And the media, always thirsty for more chapters of this story, turned the wait for the results into a national event. Marianne, in turn, publicly accepted the test but imposed conditions. She wanted it done in a laboratory of her choice, with her lawyers present, and with an extended deadline to ensure total accuracy. Philip's lawyers agreed, but with suspicion. It all seemed like a strategy to prolong the suspense and maintain public attention. While the test was being scheduled and all legal procedures were being arranged, Philip tried to maintain his routine. The Phoenix Institute was in its final phase of structuring, and he couldn't let everything crumble because of yet another scandal. But it was difficult. Every day new rumors emerged. Some newspapers speculated about his relationship with Marianne, digging through every detail, every photo, every moment. Others began to question his morality, suggesting that perhaps Marianne had been right all along. It was during this period of agonizing waiting that Eleanor reappeared. She didn't need to be called. She simply showed up at Philip's office one afternoon, carrying a folder of documents. "I thought you might need this." Philip looked at the folder, confused. "What is it?" "Proof that Marianne is lying." "How do you know?" "Because I investigated, discreetly, and I discovered interesting things." Eleanor opened the folder on the table. Inside, there were medical records, dates, receipts. She had tracked Marianne's movements over the past few months and discovered that she had consulted a fertility clinic. The dates did not match the period when she and Philip were together. More than that, there were indications that Marianne had attempted artificial insemination procedures using genetic material from an anonymous donor. "She's using a real pregnancy to emotionally extort you, but the child isn't yours." "Philip, I'm almost certain." Philip looked at the documents, feeling a mixture of relief and anger. "Why would she do that?" "Because she needs to destroy you. It's no longer about money or power, it's about revenge. You exposed her. You publicly humiliated her, and she won't rest until she sees you ruined." Philip was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at Eleanor with a gratitude that went beyond words. "Why are you doing this for me?" Eleanor hesitated. Then she decided to be honest. "Because I saw you at the worst phase of your life. I saw you broken, lost, rudderless, and yet you chose to rebuild yourself. You chose to create something good, and I won't let her take that away from you." There was something in the way she spoke, in the sincerity of her gaze, that deeply touched Philip. For the first time since Marianne, he felt he could trust again, not in the blind, naive way he had before, but consciously, by choice. "Thank you, Eleanor. Truly." She smiled, a soft but genuine smile. "Now let's end this once and for all." Philip's lawyers used the information provided by Eleanor to pressure Mary Ann's lawyers. They demanded that the test be done immediately without further delay, and they threatened to make public the inconsistencies in her story if there were any more attempts to postpone. Mary Ann, cornered, finally agreed. The test was scheduled for the following week in a neutral laboratory with both parties present. On the day of the test, the tension was palpable. Reporters surrounded the laboratory. Cameras captured every movement. Philip arrived accompanied by Eleanor and Bernard. Mary Ann arrived alone but with a confident expression. They didn't speak. They didn't even look at each other. They simply completed the medical protocol and left. The results would be released in 72 hours, and those 3 days were the longest of Philip's life. He couldn't work properly. He couldn't sleep. His mind constantly returned to the worst-case scenario. What if the child was his? What if he really was the father of Mary Ann's child? How to deal with it? How to separate the child from the mother? How to ensure that child wasn't used as a weapon? Eleanor remained by his side throughout this period. Not invasively, but constantly. She brought him food when he forgot to eat. She sat in silence when he didn't want to talk. And when he finally collapsed, exhausted, she was there to support him. The night before the results were released, they were sitting in his office, surrounded by papers and documents from the Phoenix Institute that Philip was unsuccessfully trying to review. "What if it's mine, Eleanor? What if I really am the father?" Eleanor looked at him seriously. "Then you will be the best father you can be, but not for Mary Ann, for the child, and you will ensure that they grow up far from this war." Philip nodded, but the fear was still there. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for that." "You are, you just need to believe." That night, for the first time since they met, Eleanor held Philip's hand, and he, instead of pulling away, held back. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something more fundamental. It was partnership. It was the feeling that finally he wasn't truly alone. The result came out on a Friday afternoon. Philip was in his office, surrounded by Bernard, Eleanor, and his lawyers, when the official document arrived by email. Everyone held their breath as the lawyer opened the file and read in silence. His face, initially tense, slowly relaxed, and then he smiled. "Negative. The child is not yours, Philip." The silence that followed was broken by a collective sigh of relief. Philip closed his eyes, feeling as if a ton of weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Bernard gave the young man a friendly pat on the back. "It's over, son. It's finally over." But Philip knew it wasn't quite over. One more thing remained. The public disclosure of the result happened an hour later, through a press conference called by Philip's lawyers. The document was projected for everyone to see. The conclusion was clear. Philip Ashton Caldwell was not the child's father. The reaction was immediate. Social media exploded. Mary Ann was massacred. Hate comments multiplied. People who once defended her now attacked her with ferocity. She tried to explain herself, posted a note saying it had been a mistake, that she genuinely believed he was the father, but no one believed her. The truth was evident. She had lied, and this time there was no recovering. In the following days, Mary Ann's consulting firm began to collapse. Clients cancelled contracts. Investors pulled away. And she, who had tried to rebuild her reputation at Philip's expense, watched everything crumble again. But now, there was nowhere to run, no more masks, no more tricks. Mary Ann disappeared from the media. Some said she had left the country, others that she was hiding somewhere in the countryside. But no one really cared anymore. She had become irrelevant. Philip, on the other hand, could finally breathe. The Phoenix Institute was officially inaugurated 3 months after the test results. The launch event took place in an East End London neighbourhood in a renovated, old factory that now served as a professional training centre. There was no pomp, no celebrities, just vulnerable young people, volunteer teachers, business leaders committed to social impact, and people who truly believed in the cause. Philip gave a simple but emotional speech. "I spent the last years of my life trying to be something I wasn't. trying to meet other people's expectations, and I almost lost myself in the process. But I learned something important. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be true. And that's what this institute represents. A place where young people, forgotten by society, can start anew. They can be who they truly are, and they can build futures that are theirs, no one else's. The applause was warm, and among those present, Eleanor was in the front row, smiling with pride. After the event, while everyone celebrated, Philip and Eleanor walked together through the neighborhood. The streets were bustling, children played, street vendors offered their wares. Life was happening in its most genuine form. "You did it, Philip. You really did." "We did. I wouldn't have gotten here without you." Eleanor smiled, but there was something in her gaze that Philip hadn't noticed before, something beyond friendship, beyond professional partnership, and for the first time he allowed himself to consider the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, there could be something more. "Eleanor, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Why did you never give up on me? Even when I was at rock bottom, even when everyone thought I was beyond help, you kept believing. Why?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Because I saw something in you that no one else saw, or rather something everyone saw but no one valued. You have kindness, Philip. True kindness, not the performative kindness of people who want to appear good, but the genuine kindness of someone who cares. And in a world full of calculating people, that's rare, it's precious, and it's worth fighting for." Philip felt his heart clench, not from pain, but from something different, something he hadn't felt in a long time. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. You just need to keep being who you are." They continued walking in silence, but now it was a comfortable silence. And when Philip, on an impulse that surprised even himself, held her hand, Eleanor didn't pull away. She just held back. In the following months, the Phoenix Institute grew beyond expectations. Partnerships were forged with companies, universities, and NGOs. Young people who went through the training programs found jobs. Some started their own businesses. Others returned to study. Stories of overcoming adversity began to emerge. And Philip, for the first time, felt he was doing something that truly mattered. His relationship with Eleanor also evolved, not rapidly but gradually, respectfully. They dined together, talked for hours, shared dreams and fears. And little by little, what began as a professional partnership transformed into something deeper. It wasn't the overwhelming and deceptive passion he felt for Mary Ann. It was something solid, built on trust, respect, and above all, truth. 1 year after the Institute's inauguration, Philip and Eleanor made their relationship official. There was no grand announcement, no lavish party, just an intimacy shared with close friends and family. Bernard Taylor, upon hearing the news, embraced them both with tears in his eyes. "Your father would be proud, Philip. Not for the empire you built, but for the man you have become." And Philip finally believed it. The old Caldwell family company continued to exist, now under new management. But Philip was no longer a part of it. He had completely disassociated himself, maintaining only a small shareholding without operational involvement. His focus was on the Phoenix Institute and parallel social impact projects that he and Eleanor had been developing. Mary Ann, meanwhile, had indeed left the country. Rumors said she was in Lisbon, trying to start anew away from the spotlight. Some said she had found a new partner, a Portuguese businessman. Others that she was living discreetly, working in a law firm under a false name. But these were just rumors, and Philip no longer cared. He had learned to look forward, not back. Philip eventually learned not to feel anger, not because he forgave her in a grand, theatrical way, but because he realized that carrying anger was like carrying a weight that only harmed himself. Mary Ann made her choices, he made his, and each reaped what they sowed. One summer afternoon, almost a decade after the interrupted wedding, Philip was at the Institute's headquarters when he received an unexpected call. It was a journalist asking for an interview for a documentary about overcoming adversity and new beginnings. She wanted to tell his story, from the scandal to the rebuilding. Philip hesitated. Part of him wanted to refuse. He didn't like reliving that period. But Eleanor, who was beside him, suggested that perhaps it was important, not for him, but for people going through similar situations. Your story can help someone, Philip. It can show that it's possible to get back up after falling. And that's how, for the first time in years, Philip agreed to speak publicly about everything that happened. The interview was long, emotional, but honest. He didn't hide the pain. He didn't pretend it was easy. But he also showed that it was possible, that life after betrayal wasn't the end. It was, in fact, a new beginning. When the documentary aired, the repercussions were enormous. Thousands of people reached out, sharing their own stories of overcoming adversity. The Institute received more volunteers, more donations, more support. And Philip realized that, in a way, even the worst experiences of his life had served a greater purpose. On the night of the documentary's premiere, Philip and Eleanor watched it together at home, holding hands. When it finished, she looked at him. "How do you feel?" "At peace. Finally at peace." And it was true. He no longer felt anger, no longer felt pain, no longer felt shame. He felt only gratitude. Gratitude for having survived. Gratitude for having found the right people. Gratitude for having learned the difference between true love and disguised interest. Philip Ashton Caldwell was no longer the naive businessman who was almost destroyed by an ambitious woman. He was no longer the reluctant heir who carried the weight of a surname. He was simply Philip. A man who fell, got back up, and decided to use his scars to help others do the same. And if someone were to ask him what the greatest lesson from that entire journey was, he would say without hesitation, "True power is not in controlling an empire. It is in deciding with whom to share it, and in knowing how to recognize who truly deserves to be by your side. Because in the end, it's not material achievements that define a life. It's genuine connections. It's conscious choices. It's the courage to start anew. And it's the wisdom to know that sometimes losing everything is necessary to finally find what truly matters." Dear listeners, we hope that Philip and Eleanor's story has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming adversity, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out most to you in this story. Every day, we bring intense narratives like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing that it is possible to start anew even when everything seems lost. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode.